recommendation.
So the premise of the recommendation is not that you wouldn't have people reporting spills or
Right.
doing something, you just would have them not doing as much so that you could prioritize the bigger ones.
So then the
Right.
general order become an incentive program, right? An agency would want to be in that, and if you're one of those 5%ers spilling 90% of the sewage in the state, you would have enhanced requirements. It would be an incentive for you to perform better so you can roll in with the other folks in the 95%. So I think the idea, we wouldn't backslide on requiring all spills be reported regardless of volume or destination, but to really the emphasis would be focus on the 5% are causing most of the problem and enhance their requirements. So
I would say, though, that, I mean, I would agree, but I would also say that focusing on those 5%, we also identify what is the cause of their problems, and whether it be through financial assistance or, you know, whatever mechanism. So it's not just enforcement, but actually assisting them in addressing the problem.
yeah, precisely. My idea behind this recommendation was relax the general order requirements on the 95%, put the 5% in individual orders or whatever resources at the state board would allow for that extra attention to them to figure out what their problem is, get them the help they need via DFA or consent decrees, whatever tailored enforcement action to address their unique and special problems. Because each of those 5% are going to, that are contributing that 90% spilled statewide, are going to have unique conditions. You know, it may be age of pipe, maybe construction methods at time of construction leading to extreme leakiness. It could be other things, you know. So each one, I think, will have to, of the 5% would have to be tailored, and that will be resource intensive for us. So.
Okay. So we recommend that when we open up the statewide order for the next update, that we be more explicit of what is expected to be done with the data. What's the purpose of that data, and what does the state board expect as follow-up actions to quantify the positive outcomes? That's kind of where we're at right now, and I've heard Tam asking an earlier item. And we really do need to be able to start quantifying the benefits and the outcomes.
It's so nice when staff listens to what I say.
And as we need to place the same focus of cost of compliance on ourselves here as state board staff, we should coordinate with DFA and the regional boards to not solely identify these spills, but actually put the resources to use to get them fixed. And in the previous presentation, when Steve was mentioning about the lower hanging fruit and the higher hanging fruit, I think when we look at the bigger picture and we're talking about salinity and how to take nitrates out of groundwater for drinking water and climate change and so forth, these are point source discharges to surface water. We can see them, we are getting to where we can identify them. So we may want to view this as the lower hanging fruit of discharges that are impacting our surface waters, and just put our resources together as efficient as possible and just finally address them. So that's our staff presentation, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
On the, how long have you been doing the private laterals, or including those in your permits?
That became a requirement in our 2007 order. Our original 1996 WDR for sewage collection systems did not have mandatory private lateral spill reporting. It was added in 2007.
And has this been discussed with Region 4 or with Region 2 in particular? Because those are the big urban areas where I can see it might come up.
When we had the order open for review and update, you know, we proposed to add these type of requirements for the larger private systems. There were two proposals in the order review and update. And one was regulate private systems that are over a certain size threshold and volume, flow volume threshold. And then requiring, similarly to the San Diego region, the private lateral spill reporting, which would be more your residential lateral kind of reporting to capture, and those kind of spills. But Region 2, I don't think ever expressed any interest in pulling those kind of requirements, into their region, or adopting an order to address those kind of things. But if I remember correctly, they did support that effort on the statewide general order. So,
I mean, we did have this discussion when the statewide order was before us, and I'm really intrigued with the effort in San Diego, and really would like to see the outcomes of those effort be brought to us for discussion the next time the order is back. Well, I don't know if it'll be back before us, but before the State Water Board, because, I mean, obviously, this was an issue that was debated back and forth, and the State Board did not include it in our order. But next time there hopefully will be some real data to go along with what Region 9 has been doing. So thank you for doing it, and I look forward to that upcoming discussion.
So I'd like to remind the board that we declined to actually open up the order. And so it wasn't that we decided to not do it. We just decided the board decided not to open the order up, and that we would defer those sorts of changes until the order was renewed.
Good.
Pam, I'd like to make one quick comment too, and it relates to Diana's a recommendation about using the data, deciding how we're going to use it. We adopted a regional monitoring framework in the San Diego region that says all of our monitoring has to be question-driven. So when we revise our order to incorporate the changes that we've committed to, one of the things we plan to do is, make the monitoring question-driven, even the private lateral spill reporting. And we can also work with your staff to talk about, since it's going to be a while before you open up your permit again, but, what kind of questions do we want answered that will benefit both of us, when we come around to revising these permits in the future.
Yeah,
It's definitely contender for quote of the day.
I'd like to, thank
The
you.
last one's hard to beat, though, so
Yeah,
I know
no.
it's close.
I'm not going to give you a quote, no. LA and San Diego boards, I believe, really responded to. We had an in-depth discussion during my briefing, and I feel like there's been a responsiveness to some questions I brought up. One of the things in this discussion we're just having about private laterals, one of my questions was, San Diego has some great data because of their requirements, and so we can benefit from that. Going back to 07, and what percentage of private lateral spills have reached surface water? Because that's one of the big questions, because they tend to be up in the watershed, and so it's on the order of 5%.
When I was preparing data, I didn't look at the question of how many private lateral spills reach waters of the state or surface waters, but we looked at percent of the volume spilled. So about, based on the data in CWIX, about 50% of the volume spilled from private laterals reach waters of the state. But I mean, when we say that, we also mean, dry manholes and dry canyons, because we think that still poses a public health threat and threatens beneficial uses, in addition to Doheny Beach private lateral, which is right at the beach, and human markers are showing up
Right.
on the beach.
And I'd say private laterals are going to have a larger spread, spectrum of risk to water quality. And you gave a good example of a higher risk at Doheny Beach, but then in the Bay Area region, we have a lot distant from surface water.
But I think that as you start to think about climate and sea level rise, that's going to bring in your private laterals from the beginning. I mean, really, it's going to be a big effort. And San Diego is a great place to be keeping up with this, because you all are possibly the lowest of the low in terms of elevation. So, anyway, let's keep this tied together so we can figure out what to do.
That's a good point. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize really what you have on your number 3, which is what's to be done with the data. And what kind of emerged in our discussions to me was, we do have a lot of information. we can use that, and I'm hearing that, in terms of as we contemplate updating the order, really focusing, the reporting and the monitoring on based on our experience of where the highest risk is to surface water and beneficial uses. So I really want to encourage that. Mine all that data, and let's get wisdom from it. Great.
Thank you very much. Appreciate. Like all these updates on sewage. This was great. Makes me happy. Even the lab work was awesome. Yeah. Great.
Thanks, Julie. Bye, Leslie,
Thank
sister.
you. Nice to see you.
Jeremy, we know you're not just a potted plant.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. All right. Back to the Delta. Mr. Wilson. The webcast audience just went up exponentially, however.
I was just going to say, I usually, because you have me late in the agenda, I usually speak to a sparse crowd here, but I'm sure there are thousands looking on the webcast. And thank you for delaying me an item on the agenda. I wouldn't want to have followed a speaker who could make fecal matter sound very interesting.
Pretty awesome, don't you think? Different varieties.
Good afternoon, board members. For the record, my name is Craig Wilson. I'm the state's Delta Water Master. And as you can see from this PowerPoint slide, which is my only slide for your information, I'm going to try to cover 4 things today and rather rapidly because I know you've had a very long agenda. The first item I'm going to talk a little bit about is some of the data that we've been collecting on water use in the Delta through both the statements program and the reporting of permittees and licensees. Then talk a little bit about permits in the larger Delta watershed and specifically about Term 91 and how it's been implemented very uniquely this year. Talk a little bit about informational gathering and some of the improvements we made to the website, which I think are pretty cool, and I'll get into those a little bit. And then end with the last bullet, which I could have changed to the drought proclamation. I prepared it last week before the proclamation was ever entered into. I would call your attention to the middle bullet on that, where I talk about standards relaxation. I think I deliberately included that word because I wanted to bring up the point that I think what we're going to be doing in a lot of those issues is not relaxation, but rebalancing, modifying, because a lot of these decisions we're going to be making are based on the overall public good and benefit, and there's a lot of trade-offs being made. So while I think it's a misnomer to say relaxation, I want to have the word in there just to kind of call out the issue.
Fine. We've been using the term adjustment because it seems to reflect what it is we'll be doing.
Exactly.
Adjustment.
Exactly. So let's get started. Water use in the Delta itself. As you know, the 2009 water reform legislation brought Delta diverters into the statements of water diversion and use program for the first time. So starting in 2010, we had initial statements of water diversion and use filed by about 2,000 people in the Delta. It included information about diversion points and identified the diverters involved. What it did not include was any detailed information on water measurement and use. And what the law did say, however, is supplemental statements had to be filed electronically every 3 years. And starting at that 3rd year, water measurement data had to be included for the first time. So the statements we got into the board in 2013 not only included this big slug of Delta diverters that were brought into the program, but for the first time included information on actual water use and water diversion. So for the first time, we got some detailed information on that. And I went through an exercise to try to check how accurate was this information, because we got very good compliance from the people that were required to file statements. A person on my staff, Drami Seychow, she's like a Canadian Mountie. When, she always gets her man or woman. And so we had 99% plus compliance with the actual reporting. As you know, the people that were filing the reports had the option of either measuring their water use through a flow meter, something based on best available technology, or if they could make a demonstration that that was not locally cost effective, that they could estimate their water use by some other means. And in fact, in the Delta, about 96% of the diverters chose that alternative. And the main way they used to try to estimate their water use were by what's called crop duty estimates. They took information from, and the South and Central Delta agencies put together some very good programs that enabled people to basically just plug in their acreage, what types of crops were being used, where they were located in the Delta, and put it into this algorithm, and it spit out an estimate of water use. So what I did was to try to compare the totals that we got out of these statements with data that the Department of Water Resources have compiled on water use in the Delta, basically looking at how much water was coming into the Delta, how much was going out through outflow and export, and what was left was use in the Delta. And amazingly, the totals were very close. In both cases, the totals were about 1.5 million acre feet used and about 2 million acre feet diverted. So I was kind of heartened by how close those numbers really were. Also did a little bit more of a individual check on the accuracy. We took one of the water districts who had a large history in actually using flow meters and had very detailed records on their water use, and then just took these crop duty estimate algorithms and ran the figures on that district and what crops they were using, what the acreage was. And again, the totals were surprisingly close, within probably about 10% of what the flow meters showed. So even though some people are somewhat critical of the fact that most of the people in the Delta used these estimates, our conclusion was that the estimates seem like they're at least in the ballpark regarding water use. So to conclude that first subject matter area, I think we have certainly more certainty than we have in the past, not only on the number of people diverting water in the Delta, but also on the water use itself. So switching to the second topic.
Where are you're posting this on your on the website? This information?
We have information on our website regarding how many people are diverting and breaking it down between statement holders and people that are claiming water rights based on riparian, pre-14 use, and also how many people are reporting as a permittee or licensees. I don't have it up on the website, the actual total amounts. I think that's a good point. I think I could add that to the summary. We have a summary page of water use and put that on there. That's a good idea. I'll do that.
Great.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
Though not the subject of the report, were you able to glean any information on conservation practices? So crop type compared to, and water amount used compared to the rest of the state?
The statement program itself requires that the forms being submitted talk about conservation efforts. I have not gone back and done a statistical analysis of how many people are using, drip irrigation, more efficient water distribution systems, some of the efficiency measures. It'd be pretty hard to try to calculate that in a spreadsheet type of form. What I've found, and looking, in the larger Delta watershed where water is more expensive, it tends to be used, more efficiently. And so, if you're looking south of the Delta, you probably see more significant and costly water efficiency measures being put in, because the cost of water is such a big part of the overall, agricultural water equation if you're talking about agricultural use.
Right, but the method of estimation, so is there a report that has information, for example, corn, and how many acre feet typically is used? How did they arrive at these estimates?
Yeah, what they do basically is they took information from some of the universities that have done these crop duty estimates based on soil probes and measurements. And what happened is that South Delta Agency and Central Delta Agency took some of the information from the stations that were located in the Delta, tried to come up with a common factor to them to derive it at water use. And the way they got kind of back calculated to the actual amount of water diverted gave a range of multiplier factors based on the type of irrigation practice that was used. And I guess we could try to go back it'd be kind of difficult and go back and kind of analyze, what percentage of people in the Delta were using what type of irrigation measure, but we haven't done that to date.
Okay.
So turning to the larger Delta watershed, because the Delta Water Master Authority not only extends to diversions in the Delta, but permits and conditions of permits in the larger Delta watershed. The main way we've got into Term 91, have got into this issue of curtailments and permits is through application of Term 91. And as you know, Term 91 is a permit condition that's placed in 100 or so junior water right holders in the Sacramento River watershed. It's invoked when the major projects are releasing stored water to meet Delta water quality standards. Because of the year we had this year, Term 91 was invoked very early, and in fact, it is in place to this day, and that's unprecedented to have Term 91 invoked in the wintertime period. In fact, we even sent out an additional notice last week for a few water right permit holders that their permits, their season of use just kicked in January 1st. So it's not a large number of people, but they were covered. I'm sure this is a historic first. We'll also have to gear up based on the way the water year seems to be shaking out for implementation of Term 91 to a larger group of people who start their irrigation season in the spring. Also, we'll consider invoking curtailments under what's called Term 93, which is very similar to Term 91, but applies to the San Joaquin River watershed. So that's the main vehicle we're using. And I guess I could conclude by saying, this is kind of a first stage of what the board might be considering invoking to even a larger number of people that don't have permit conditions, in their permits. And the board, as you know, went out with a notice of possible curtailment of water, and it would probably be implemented somewhat like Term 91 has been to date. So the third topic I want to talk is really kind of a cool thing that we put onto our web page. You go to the board's website, the home page, and you click down on the Water Master icon at the bottom. You'll have a section now titled Interactive Water Rights Map, and it's something that was put together by our staff and with a great help from the board's IT and webmaster. And what it has is a map of the Delta. And you can click on any island. It gives you a screen of all the islands and tracts in the Delta. You can click on that link, and it will show the island. It will show every diversion. It will link to the permit or license or the statement involved, so you can go to virtually any diversion that's taking place that's been reported to us and get detailed information on exactly what the diversion is, where it's taking place, under what claim of water right. So it's a pretty cool thing. And we're also putting up narratives for each island and tract that kind of describe more of in a narrative form what's going on in the island and tract. And we were hoping this summer to go out and kind of field check, since we've got pretty good information on what people have reported to us, and see how accurate that is. With the drought conditions, I think the people that we were going to use for that field effort might be used for other purposes, but we'll see how that shakes out.
And is this, are you using the ERIM? I mean, is the data that you have in here, the maps that you have on the website, are they related to ERIMs?
Yeah, a lot of the data comes from ERIMs, and there was kind of a data dump, and don't ask me because I'm not real savvy on the IT part of it, but somehow the IT people were able to take that data, plot all the diversion points on these screenshots of individual islands, and then reference back to a lot of the information that's in ERIMs. It's pretty impressive. I hope people would take an opportunity to take a look at it. Now, last but not least, is I want to talk a little bit about my role in water shortage and drought activities, and it'll be a shared role with the board, the board's division of water rights, and myself. As you may recall, when the Delta Water Master was first put into place, that there was a statute that created the Delta Water Master, and then the board delegated certain authorities to the Water Master, and then there was a redelegation of some of those responsibilities to division staff. So we have kind of mix of authority, but it's funny that the governor's drought proclamation really, calls out our role in the three items that I have at the bottom of the screen: transfers, standards, and curtailment notices. So I'll take just a second to go through each of those. My office will not have a lot to do with water transfers. We're involved in some of the meetings and may be involved in one of the things that the governor's proclamation called for is the consideration of a consolidated place of use for the two major projects, which will expedite transfers. If that's done, the amount of transfers that the board itself will be dealing with will be relatively small. It'll be transfers between individuals or districts out of their particular area, and the board's been very good on transfers in the past. We're coordinating, having meetings with the Department of Water Resources that I think will be very nimble in this area and should work out well. I've offered at least one of my staff to help with the Division of Water Rights on processing any transfers. I'm not sure if they'll even need that help, but it's available. Now, as far as the standards itself, again, as you know, the governor's proclamation now allows us to process temporary urgency changes that would make modification to standards where we can make the appropriate findings. We still go through the same.
Actually, it would be changes to the water rights, which are used to implement the standards, not changes to the standards.
Excuse me, temporary urgency changes to the water right permits that would allow modification of the underlying standards. And that's going to be an interesting process because as of February 1st, there's going to be quite a few of the more stringent standards in our D1641 permits to the projects and the underlying 2006 Water Quality Control Plan kick in, such as delta outflow requirements. And so we can expect to see requests to make modifications to that. And, I'm not going to prejudge those. We've been working with the project people and trying to explain what kind of information we would like to see to process those very quickly. The temporary urgency change process is very expedited. The staff will be able to make the changes in just a number of days. The board could decide to hold hearings after those are put in place to get input, but to actually get them in place, the process is very, very expedited and can be done very quickly. And then the last item I'll just briefly mention, the same day that the drought proclamation was issued, we also at the board level put on the board's webpage and noticed that there would be a possibility that later this year, based on water conditions, that many water right people that are pretty much dependent upon certain use of water and have relied on that for a long time could possibly see curtailments. If it comes to a situation where most of the water in the major water courses is stored water being released by the project and there's a very little natural or abandoned flow, we may have to be faced with the dismal prospect of notifying people that are even fairly senior water right holders that there may not be water available for them to divert, and that would also lead to possible inspection efforts. We've worked with the board's division and also with the Department of Water Resources to try to gear up inspection process so that we can go out and check to see if water is being used fairly and correctly by all. So just to conclude on this whole topic, some of these decisions we're going to be having to make this spring and summer. We're going to be requiring sacrifices by all, north of the Delta, in the Delta, south of the Delta, agricultural users, urban users, fishery people, and all we can try to do is just do the best we can based on the information we have after listening to everybody and trying to get as much input as we can. So I'll close with that.
What do you think we as the board should be paying most attention to in terms of trying to anticipate what's coming down the pike? We're relying on you, we're relying on staff, we're relying on the governor's office and resources and others. But what are you're meeting with people on a weekly basis or
Virtually an hourly
basis? Okay.
I
And
mean, there's a lot of players involved and a lot of moving parts, and so much of it is driven by, by Mother Nature. And you read these weather forecasts, and you've got this just parade of horribles with a very low carryover storage by the reservoirs, almost no snowpack to feed into those reservoirs, and every weather forecast I've heard over
Yes.
from next week to next month to 3 months is pretty dismal. So we know, at least with some realistic expectation, that we're going to be dealing with very dry conditions. When we also know that those dry conditions are going to make it virtually impossible to operate business as usual. So we have to start making these decisions as quickly as we can. And I think the governor's proclamation gives us a pretty good roadmap on how to operate both in water transfer areas to try to transfer water where it's most needed, deal with the standards situation, and possibly deal with curtailment of water use.
And I assume if it looks like we might, or if it looks likely that we will be moving into more senior water rights people, that we would be sending out letters prior to any action being taken between the two of you. I don't know.
We posted a letter, as Craig said, and we're going to be advertising it. I'm not quite sure if we're mailing it to every water right holder, but we're going to be putting it in the newspaper, and we've posted on our website advising all parties, riparians, pre-1914s and post-1914 appropriators, that they are subject to curtailment in a year like this, and if conditions continue, we will be sending out curtailment letters specifically to water right holders throughout the state, but in targeted watersheds, depending on what the hydrology looks like as time proceeds.
My other question has to do with, and I'm looking at Michael now, I read that TID is looking at possibly using recycled water rather than selling it to someone. You're having I guess Stockton, is it? Or anyway, whatever the city is that where they were going to be getting the wastewater, that they were looking at perhaps using it themselves. And so and I just met with some folks down in Southern California who say that temporarily there is water available for groundwater recharge or for whatever, but there are limitations that are Clean Water Act, not water rights, restrained. And so my question is can you foresee a time when we would want to look at what might be done to produce more water for people under a temporary situation of drought that would might be a challenge in terms of the.
Well, it'll be interesting to have some conversations with the folks who are perceiving obstacles with some of those. Because, for example, most of the recycled water facilities already have NPDES permits that allow some discharges to surface water. I mean, if it's not going into the reclaimed water pipe, purple pipe, it's just going down into the river system.
I think it's mostly recharge into groundwater basins.
Yeah, and in most instances, there's not going to be a Clean Water Act issue with that because the Clean Water Act doesn't reach to groundwater. It's been interesting whether it's on water rights or water quality, there's a lot of misinformation going around right now with respect to what the challenges are and what the limitations are. And there are a lot of people who think that the Clean Water Act is serving as a barrier to certain groundwater projects. And the reality is it just doesn't reach groundwater except in extraordinarily rare circumstances where there's a direct connection to surface water. So, to the extent that we see people coming in with information like that, certainly you can point them to our office and we'll help walk them through some of the issues.
There may well be, though, basin plan barriers, where the basin plan's beneficiary or objectives can be a barrier to recharge, but that's not a Clean Water Act.
Okay,
Lastly,
so
I'd mention that we've been working with Region 5. The question has arisen whether or not we could put together a statewide general permit in a very short time to allow discharge or recharge of water with recycled water that presently isn't being used for that purpose. And so we're looking into that, and maybe in the next few days we'll have an answer as to the feasibility and the timeline to get that done, which might have some advantage. There are a number of people, like the TID project, that would actually probably want such a permit.
And working with our friends at the Department of Public Health as well, because they have a role in this that is critically important, that we want to be absolutely sure that we are wearing our public health lens as well, as
Every
we've been
recycled
advised.
water permit includes the requirement. We just incorporate them, whatever they give us, as the requirements for public health.
At least in my experience is that the limitation is not from the public health side. It's often what is the percent mix of recycled water with other water sources, and that is generally a basin plan
Or a salt
issue.
issue,
And I
that's
thought it was associated with the Clean Water Act, but you're not.
One thing, just since we're having this conversation, we are going to be having a workshop in February to talk about the array of things, and we should just talk about what the categories of things are that we should be talking about, both in terms of water rights implementation, but also in terms of augmenting recycled water funding, same with water conservation, all of the issues in the proclamation that deal with us, as well as inviting people to give us suggestions for other ways that we could be helpful in this time of drought. So we'll need to do a little thoughtful planning of that February meeting. Go ahead. And then I'll turn back.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned funding, because that's what I was going to ask. I just remember in the 2009 drought, really working more on the federal side, projects that got through. Of course, there was, after the fact, a lot of people upset about, who were winners and losers. So just, I'd like to get some information about criteria and pots of funding that are available, and, what we're doing to get the word out in the meantime to folks that could be applying. So I actually have some questions about prior use of Term 93. I had never even heard of Term 93 before, so wondering if it's had been used in the past.
Rarely. It's been used probably a couple times in the last 20 years or so. It's a term that kind of relates to how much water is being released, out of New Melona's reservoir to help maintain, flow and salinity at Vernalis, which is just at the edge of the delta on the east side. And it could be likely to be invoked this year based on what we're looking at with the data.
And any sense on the users that might be subject to Term 93?
Term 93.
The number of users?
Yeah, it's again around 100 people. It's most of the permits and licenses that are up on the San Joaquin River watershed. So what we could do, like we've done with Term 91, we can do these calculations and put out an advance notice just to give them information that's possible that this could be invoked this year. It hasn't been for probably at least, I think, close to 20 years.
Okay, and then waste and unreasonable use. A little bit of history on the last time that was used under similar circumstances. Was it 1977? I seem to remember hearing about that.
I mean, waste and unreasonable use, is a constitutional provision that could be invoked as a tool to deal with some of the water issues this year. I know when I first took office, I issued a report that was quite controversial on the topic of the unreasonable use doctrine and possibly leading to more efficient conservation practices. It wasn't too well received at the time, but I think it's been somewhat validated over the years by the National Academy of Sciences and BDCP and others. I think it is a tool, along with some of the others that we have, and going out and maybe some of our inspections and stuff to see if certain practices that might not be considered unreasonable in a time of plenty could be considered unreasonable in a time of not plenty.
But any specifics on where it was used?
Yeah,
in the
I
past?
think the board had a few cases, I'm not sure it reached the board member level, but we had, I think the Division of Water Rights put together a paper on past efforts, and there were at least 2 or 3 cases. One, I remember, I'll date myself, when I was a staff attorney at the Water Board in the 70s, we had a situation where some very large there was a proposal to sink some very large and deep water wells in Yolo County and extract groundwater and ship it down south somewhere. And a lot of people in the north said that would actually, create a cone of depression and poach the Sacramento River, and that was either an unreasonable use or unreasonable method of use. And the board ended up, declining to approve that. And there's 2 or 3 other examples. There was a lake down in Southern California called Mission Viejo, I believe, that they were attempting to fill with fresh water. It was for some recreational, subdivision, and we ended up saying that based on the reasonable use theory that they, could not use fresh water to fill that lake. It ended up, it was kind of a win-win. They ended up getting some brackish water or some water that was not potable water and filled up that lake. So there are examples.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of you. Look forward to it. Thanks a lot, Craig. Last but not least, item number 14, the Executive Director's Report. Poor Tom, you probably need to put an addendum on
Yes.
that, don't you?
My big moment every month, but
I know. It's
I don't
very
really have
thorough.
it. I mean, it's written. It's in your package. Didn't have any any particular thing I wanted to bring to your attention. So, if you have any questions, I can attempt to answer them.
The integrated water management projects, they all came to a close at a similar time frame. Is that because they were issued at a similar time frame, or?
Yeah, they were issued about we did a whole bunch of them at
Right.
the same time. Actually, I was just talking with a few people, and we were going to do some information items for the board on some of the projects to go through what was accomplished, and get that to you.
Good. No, those look very interesting. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all. We are not adjourning. We are recessing until tomorrow morning when we'll have a workshop on the groundwater concept paper. Look forward to seeing many of you again tomorrow morning. Thank you.